Hello everyone, this is Benny Hills back with another Vintage Cube analysis video. So a couple announcements for this one. First of all, I have a new background and I have this mic, which I've had for a couple of videos, but leveling up the technology a little bit, so hopefully that's good, and definitely continue to let me know if there's any way I can improve the presentation of the content. And then as for the content, it's the end of Vintage Cube, so I'm very sorry about this. Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. I did manage to get my 50th trophy last night and did manage to secure the trophy lead, so that's a good way to end it. But throughout this whole time, I've been recording my statistics. And so I did a little bit of analysis, made some pivot tables, and I won't go into the details of this, but it's pretty basic analysis. And I created a little exhibit to just highlight a couple different findings. And so a couple people have commented that they would like to see my statistics. And so I guess I'll just quickly run through the way I keep my data before I go into that. I've tried in the past keeping very detailed data, keeping track of like mulligan decisions, game by game statistics, like how many pieces of power I get, all these things in various past formats. And I found the more details I keep in the data, the less consistently I maintain it. And it's more important to have a complete data set than a super detailed data set, in my opinion. So this time I recorded a little bit less information. I just recorded my deck and the league result instead of game by game result. So, 3-0, 2-1, whatever. And then my first pick, and then whether or not I played the first pick. And also how good I thought the deck was out of 10. So first deck 4, not too good, you see. And then I have a couple notes here. A lot of them, they're not really in the analysis. They're just reminders for me. This is cool. Beat turn 3, Emrakul the Promised End with a control deck. But yeah, so this is my data. It's pretty simple. I also added in, after I created the data, I sort of compiled different decks into macro archetypes, which I'll get into in a bit, and then just a blue binary variable. So yeah, I mean, blue, how good blue decks are is a decent part of the analysis. So that's my data. You can ask me for more detailed information if you want. It's 127 total matches, and it's still not perfect. Sometimes I just didn't remember to record the first pick or whatever. There's also, I decided to include 4 coaching session matches. And so, yeah, that's why there's 52 trophies here, because 2 of them came from coaching matches. So, yeah, there's that. And now I'll get into the exhibits. So, first of all, I just put decks by trophy count. So, or macro archetypes by trophy count. So you can see, whoops, sorry about that. Blue control accounts for a strong plurality of my trophies. So that's not really surprising if you see my drafts, and also if you just know about Vintage Cube. Blue is the strongest color. This is a well-known fact. So I went through and I highlighted certain things that I want to sort of bring attention to. So just the fact that this was almost twice as many as the next biggest deck is definitely pretty telling. And then you see all the way down to Storm with 1. I'm very happy that I did manage to get 1 Storm trophy, but certainly not my forte. So, I mean, this is not that informative because it doesn't show you how many times I've played them, but it's sort of a nice place to see where I got my trophies. So, blue decks, and then mono white was my top non-blue deck, and then Reanimator, and so on and so forth from there. So, now we're going to look at decks by trophy percentage, which is the more relevant thing. So these are all those decks from above listed by what the percent of the time where I drafted that deck that I got a trophy. So you can see Sneak Attack was number 1, but that doesn't really mean anything. Because it's 1 for 1. In general, a lot of the data we're working with here is going to be very uncredible. Not incredible as in really cool. It just doesn't have credibility because the sample size is too small. So don't go say Sneak Attack is the best deck from this. Obviously, one league is not enough to tell, and for a lot of these different things, there are slightly low numbers. So that's unfortunate, but I still think it's interesting to look at and potentially illustrates something. So I thought it was interesting that Green Ramp had such a high win percentage. Again, really small sample size, but I sort of would have, I don't think of green as particularly strong. And so I was interested to see that it did so well. And then blue-green, I've played much, much more, which this is basically a category of, mostly mono-green, but splashing for Oko or Opposition or Time Walker, broken blue cards. And that actually was quite a bit, bigger sample size, but lower win percentage. It had the same trophy percentage as my overall sample. And so, again, maybe if I just played more with normal green decks, that would be better. But this is, slight evidence that the blue splash is actually not worth it, just because having perfect consistent mana and a very linear game plan is strong. And yes, cards like Opposition are really good, but it's possible that just going all in on getting Creator Hoof as fast and consistently as possible is more effective than trying to interact in a deck that doesn't have great interaction no matter what. one or two cards that interact, and then like sort of weaker proactive cards around that might be worse. I mean, again, too small of a sample size to make a consistent claim from this, but I do think that's interesting. Secondly, blue control was very consistent, solid, like well above average. So that's pretty strong evidence. Like this is like pretty significant with 32 leagues of a sample size. Like I think you can pretty definitively say that like blue control, at least for me, is just better than not blue control. Like out of anything with a reasonable sample size, it's the highest by a decent margin. So no real surprise there, but there's not an anti-surprise. Like, I mean, blue control isn't like an underperformer or whatever. And again, I'll break out blue control into like blue-white control and, Jeskai and various things later. But just for now, it's all in one big category. And then secondly, mono-white is better than average. As sort of expected, I've recorded a decent number of mono-white trophies, and I didn't quite get to over 50% trophies with mono-white, but it was definitely very good. I guess I haven't called attention to this number. Overall, 41% trophy percentage, so pretty happy with that. Like, no matter how good you do, unless it's 100%, you always want it to be better, and so hopefully next Vintage Cube I can keep tracking and get up to 45 or something, but this is a really big sample size, so maintaining over 40% with a huge sample size is pretty nice. And then a couple things I also want to bring attention to. Blue artifacts is worse than I thought, by a lot, actually. On my pick order, a lot of the blue artifacts cards were ranked very highly, like Tinker and Tolarian Academy and whatnot, and I do still think they're good cards. But the fact that I drafted this almost 13% of the time and trophied under 8% of the time is under 8% of my trophies were with this deck is maybe a sign that I was sort of pushing that a bit too highly, and like if I have blue cards, I should just do a blue control deck, not blue artifacts. So, I mean, again, 16 leagues, not massive, but it's something. And then secondly, I guess the blue-green trophy percentage is just quite a bit lower. So, here it is by type. And then there's a couple, like, decks at the bottom that I barely played and didn't trophy with. I actually thought this Ponza deck was pretty sweet. I thought it was going to trophy, and it was a solid 2-1. But, yeah, so that's my decks by trophy percentage. Blue decks look pretty good. Yeah. Oh, also, Reanimator was a little bit worse than I would have expected, too. I generally do think Reanimator decks are pretty good. I think a good Reanimator deck is better than a good green ramp deck. But, like, this anecdotal evidence is maybe pointing to the contrary. So next up, I'm looking at the breakdown of blue control decks. So there's a couple different categories. Blue-eye control is the most common. Unsurprising if you just know me. I played it significantly more than any other type of deck, and so I don't know if that reflects like openness or power level or just personal bias. But that is the case, and I got 6 trophies with it, so it did well. Over 50% win rate with blue-eye control, so that is pretty solid. Although like the overall blue trophy deck is also the blue control deck's trophy to over 50% of the time already, so that's not like a massive upgrade over that. Esper Control had a decent sample size with 5 trophies, and I did not do particularly well with that. So that's sort of interesting. I have thought of Esper as a pretty good color combination, but I drafted it a decent amount, but it did perform a decent amount worse than just blue-white, and that sort of makes sense. Like, black doesn't add... I mean, it adds a couple really strong cards, like Ashiok and the Scarab God and whatnot, but black interaction doesn't add too much that blue and white doesn't. Like, there's a couple... like discard spells, and like Thoughtseize is a big addition, but Thoughtseize and Duress and Inquisition are 3 cards, and usually you get like 1 maybe in your deck, and then the creature hand disruption is not great in an Esper deck that's playing Wraths, so I guess black just doesn't add too much, and so that did underperform a little bit, and then a bunch of like 1-for-1s, which you can't really read anything into, and then again, blue-black control did pretty poorly. I mean, 1-for-3, small sample size still, but like, if I'm going to draft a blue control deck, I should trophy with it, right? Like, so... this just makes me think that blue-black might be slightly worse than I thought it was before. So, yeah, that's just a semi-interesting finding, although, again, it's not statistically significant or anything like that. Yeah. All right, next up, this is looking at my first picks. So, first of all, I just wanted to look at, like, sort of the macro analysis, like, how often do I play the first pick? Because something that I've talked about a lot as a key to my success is being very flexible and being open to sort of, like, throwing aside all of your first pack and just like moving into a new thing if it looks really open. And so I played my first pick 87.5% of the time in trophy drafts, and 12.5% of the time I didn't. And I did perform better when I did not play my first pick, which is very interesting because playing your first pick has a big advantage in Vintage Cube specifically over other formats, because there's like power 9 cards, and like Moxen that you'll play in any deck. So, like, I actually thought that I would not play my first pick more than 11.6% of the time. Even though this is probably my hypothesis that this would be higher than it is for most people. I think a lot of people basically just like take their first pick or wed to it and build everything around that, even if it's cut. And I really pride myself on not doing that. My guess is that in any other format, including like Legacy Cube, this number would be way higher, like 20 or maybe even 30%. But I do think it's very interesting that like in the packs where I don't lead on power and do abandon my first 10 packs or whatever, I just jump ship and do better. So that's pretty cool. And that's like not super significant, but like 14 leagues is something. It's pretty solid. So I definitely thought that was pretty interesting. So that is a sign. Like, I don't know what percent normal people dump their first pick is, but like, keep that open. Like, that's a very legit possibility, and it might go well. And often this is going to be like you start in blue and then jump ship to white. That's, I would imagine, the most common. I've done that a couple times in videos, and that usually goes well because, like, I guess I only do this when a color is clearly wide open, and when a color is clearly wide open, it's going to go well. So then, just looking at what cards I'm first picking. Most common card to first pick was Time Walk. There's, like, a lot of randomness plays into this because, like, I mean, I guess I would take Time Walk over Mox Pearl, and, like, maybe one time I did open both. But this basically just means Time Walk is a Power 9 card that I happen to open the most often. So these are listed by the most commonly picked. Treachery was surprisingly high, and I did very well with it. So, I mean, that's indicative of those solid blue control decks. And then Mox Pearl is also really good, which makes sense because blue-white control and mono-white are two of my top decks. Jace and Oko both did not perform particularly well, and these are cards that I often did try and play in the blue-green decks. Like, first pick one of these, go into green, and, like, try and get the whole, like, card advantage of blue and mana ramp from green deck. And so this is, like, supporting the hypothesis that, like, splashing Oko is in a green deck is not quite as good as it seems on paper. Again, like, I would still do it if I open an Oko, but, like, maybe you shouldn't be, like, going as out of your way to make that a priority. I don't know. I mean, not conclusive, but it's just something to think about. Couple of things were like, I mean, Tinker did well, so maybe the blue artifact decks are like, when they get Tinker, they're very good, but they're pretty weak otherwise. Just like having mana and then like expensive blue card isn't as good as like having a sort of combo-y thing. Never fail when I get a Flooded Strand, so that's good. Shelldock went over 3, which is very surprising because I think of this as one of the best cards in blue control decks. So I don't really know what the cause is for this. It's probably just randomness, but it is interesting. At least one of these was one where I jumped ship to and did not play Shelldock. I just remember that draft, so that's something. You can see all these ones that I first picked at various points, so all these cards are cards that I think are pretty sweet. Yeah, I'll just sort of show them, but not dwell on any one of these too much, because, again, there's no statistical insights to be gained from this. Soul Ring, over 1, confirmed terrible. Channel was the top card from my pick order video that I never number 1 picked. It's not in this list, and I ranked it as number 18, so that's just sort of a fun fact. Like, I don't remember if I just opened it but then had better cards, or just, like, didn't open it or what. I mean, I definitely played Channel decks, but it would either be picking it, first pick in a later pack, or just sort of, other things like that. Ancestral Recall, also confirmed terrible. Yeah, so there's that. And also, definitely let me know in the comments if you want me to elaborate on any of these sections. Like, these are just a bunch of graphs that I sort of put together just because, like, they were things that came to mind for ways to split up the data. So if you want me to elaborate on any one of these, or, like, create a new graph, or sort of split the data in any other way, let me know. And also, even if you just want me to send you my data, I can do that too. So definitely, I'm not trying to keep any secrets here. Like, no offense, but I think even if you have all these secrets, I can still beat you. And, I just open book, whatever you want to see, I'm down for. Ponder and Preordain, both not getting there. The brothers. So next up is blue the best. I just wanted to, like, combine all of the macro archetypes that were blue, and there was not a big difference, but blue decks did perform slightly better overall. Pretty solid sample size for both, but this is like, I mean, I didn't do any actual rigorous statistical test on this, but I'm almost positive that's within the margin of error. So there's that, but it is slightly bigger. But I guess probably the more interesting finding is that there's not a big difference. Although again, I usually do start a draft with the assumption that I am playing blue, and then only deviate if it's clear that I should. So I can see that sort of working either way, where like I sometimes play blue. Actually, yeah, this probably is a sign that blue is better than this would indicate, because like I play blue when it's moderately open, and the only time I deviate is when another color is wide open. So the fact that blue still has a higher win percentage is pretty strong evidence that blue is just the best color. I mean, again, no surprise there, but still something. And then, can I predict success? This is looking at the relationship between how strong I think the deck is before I play any games with it to actually how well it performs. So, first of all, you can see like most of my decks are 7s or 8s. That's definitely the most common, and then 9s and 6s are next. There's like a few at the very low end, and then a very few number of 10s. But this is where the meat of it is, and you do see like the relationship you would expect. Like out of all the ones that have a decent sample size, like it basically does just get better the higher you get, except for this. But that's only 4 drafts. Like, you know, I think in one of these, like, I had a 10 out of 10 deck, and then I just lost to my opponent having Black Lotus on turn 1, like, 2 games out of 3, and just losing to that. So, like, if you just turn this into a 3, then, like, this is a perfect progression. So, like, nothing to read into here, really. But I do think I'm happy that like, my 7, 8, like, 6, 7, 8, 9 were all in order like that. And then down here, like, again, I mean, yeah, nothing really to be gleaned from the fact that my 3s performed pretty well, just because there's so few of them. I guess it's a bit interesting that my 4s is better than my 5s, but I don't think there's too much there. And then my 1 was certainly bad, and I was able to call that one correctly. And then looking at that by deck, you see there's some decks that I was consistently over or underrating. So first of all, I'm just going to point out the Sneak Attack deck. I only played 1, but it was 9, and I knew that was going to be good, and it was. After that, the highest deck on average was Green Ramp. So this sort of suggests that, like, I'm only going into mono green when there's like Raphaelos and Nissa and like compelling reasons why you do want to be mono green over Splash. So that could potentially explain part of the high win rate. Blue control decks were ranked not that good. They were like, I ranked them slightly better than average. It's a pretty nice average, and I thought that was a bit interesting, but like, it sort of makes sense. It's a bit higher than average and a considerably higher trophy percentage. So that makes me think I was actually underrating the blue control decks a bit. Blue mid-range, though, was worse. So it's only 6 decks, but I thought that my blue mid-range decks were better than blue control decks on average. And the difference is these blue mid-range decks often had more colors and like more sort of multicolored value threats like Leovold and stuff like that, whereas blue control relied more on counterspells. And so it does look like counterspells are just probably better than having better threats. So when in doubt, take that counterspell over that like nice mid-range threat. So that's a finding to get from there. Next up, mono white, I thought was considerably worse than average. Like normally, there were some mono white decks that were 9, where I get like 2 Moxen or whatever. But the average mono white deck I thought was a decent amount worse than my normal deck, but I still got more trophies with it. So that's a sign that I was underrating mono white, even though I did play it a decent amount. Like, it was one of my more common decks to play, but when I did play it, I thought it was not great, and maybe I should have respected it a bit more. And then lastly, Reanimator, I ranked quite a bit higher than average, and with 12 drafts, that's like a decent sample size, but it performed much worse. So I think I was overrating Reanimator a little bit. Yeah, I just think that it's not quite as strong as I thought it was, I guess. And then finally, Twin is sort of interesting. And this is one that I ranked very highly. Only 7 drafts, but like when I had Twin decks, I thought they were sweet, 7.7 out of 10, and it performed slightly better than average, despite being ranked much more highly. So even though Twin is a good deck, it looks like, it's not the best deck. I actually would have probably said it was the best deck. Like, Open Twin is the best deck in the format, would have been my hypothesis going into that. And I'm not sure that these 7 matches or 7 leagues are enough to convince me that that's not true, but it is points for just like control decks being better than the combo finish. Yeah, and again, like, obviously, like, these 7 twin decks are not the same. There's probably some that had 5 counterspells and some that were more mid-rangey, and like that could be the relevant variable that's driving this like slightly lower than expected trophy percentage. But I'm not going to go like that micro, because if I break it apart even more, then it becomes even smaller sample sizes for everything, and that sort of defeats the purpose of looking at rolled up statistics. So yeah, that was sort of interesting. Twin is maybe not quite as good as I thought. So that's my last graph. Again, like, I'm more than happy to share the data or break it apart in any way, but I did think this was pretty interesting. I guess my sort of overall conclusions to draw from this is that blue is, in fact, the best, and blue control is better than blue mid-range. So you really want counter spells, you really want card draw, and then the threats are less important. The blue control decks generally had like fewer top-end threats, but they were still very, very high-performing. Looks like maybe I undervalued green and white a little bit and overvalued Reanimator a bit. And combo decks in general were not great for me. Although that's, there's a lot of things that are at play here. I think I'm probably better at playing blue-white control decks or just blue control decks in general than combo decks. So like maybe if you're a very excellent combo like twin pilot, you could do better with twin than blue control. I'm not saying that that's not the case for everyone, but I do think for me, it looks like to maximize trophies, generally playing a lot of blue control and mono white is the way to go. and more green. And more green is something I should include as well. That seems like something that is worth mentioning here. And then further that the blue splash is, like, it looks better. Although I guess even not really. 8.7 versus 7.2. So that's sort of interesting. But yeah, like blue-green is not quite as, like, busted as sometimes I might have thought. And then one specific deck that I want to call attention to that I thought was interesting is, let's see, where's the blue deck breakdown? Here. Wait, is this? Yeah. So, blue, Oko, Uro. This deck, I mean, I've only played it once. It's not like a established archetype at all, but it was just a really, really sweet deck. This deck I played, it was mono blue. The only green cards were Oko, Uro, and then one Reclamation Sage, in the main deck at least. And I thought this deck was super fun, and it felt very powerful because I just had great interaction. But then Oko and Uro are both exactly the kind of thing that this deck needs. Because you don't have good interaction with creatures or artifacts and enchantments, and Oko does that very well. And then you don't have, like, great creatures and ways to close out the game quickly or ramp, and Uro does all that really well. And you fill the graveyard very quickly, which makes Uro much better. Like, if you play a base green deck with Uro, your cards are mostly staying on the battlefield, so you're not really filling the graveyard, and it just, like, makes it a little bit harder to be casting that to escaping it. So I thought this deck was sweet. I sort of wish, I mean, it's not going to be open very much because you need a lot of blue cards, and blue is not opened that often, but really fun deck, and I think it is powerful. I think the Equilibrium trophy rate, if this deck was always open, is definitely higher than 0%. So that's just something I want to draw attention to. And yeah, that is my data. So here we go. Here it is. Lots of good stuff. Yeah, some sort of interesting stuff in the notes here, but yeah, I'm not going to go through specific stuff like that, but here it all is. Oh, I guess one thing I didn't include, but my trophy percent in coaching sessions was 50%. So that is a good sign about the skill of the people I was playing with. I mean, it's also a small sample size, but like it's not just like me calling the shots when we did that. The way I do coaching is I'm open to anything, but the way I've done it here is that the player that I'm coaching does the draft. Like, it's on their computer. Every single pack, I'm like, okay, what are you picking here? And they sort of say what they would pick and go through their logic, and then we talk about it together and decide. And like generally, I mean, I think always do, when we disagree, we go with what I've decided, but not because I just like override them, because we like just talk about it and they sort of agree that makes sense. But I do think there's some times where I miss things and they catch them. So congratulations to my coaching people. I think we had some really sweet decks, 8, 8, 7, and 9. Yeah. So that is my wrap up of my statistics. Thank you for watching. My job involves a lot of data analysis, so I thought it was sort of fun to put all this together. And I wish that I had more complete data. Like, it would be really interesting to see the correlation between pieces of power and win percentage or things like that. But I just knew that the more time it took to record data, the less consistently I would do it, and I just didn't want to have any holes. So, I mean, I still have some holes like here and whatnot, but what can you do? So yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. And I guess, also, please let me know what format you want to see. So I've been asking this in a couple videos and comments, and a lot of people have said, I would say the two most common are definitely Modern and Pioneer, probably in that order, which is awesome because those are also the two things that I would prefer the most. Well, also a lot of people said more Cube, but that's not an option for a little bit. But yeah, Pioneer and Modern are definitely the two formats that I've played the most. the two constructed formats I played the most. So I'll definitely be making some of those videos in the next couple days. And I'm going to start with blue-white control decks because that's what I've had a lot of success with, and I also just think they're very good in both of those formats. But if you have a specific list you'd like me to play or like anything like that, let me know in the comments and we can potentially figure something out. And some people have commented Legacy. There actually has not been a single request for Standard, which is a sad statement about the current state of Standard, but it does make sense given what I've heard. And I've basically never played Standard, so I was happy about that. And then people that want Legacy, I'll try to make the occasional Legacy video, but it's both not my area of expertise and not as many people suggested it, so that probably won't be too common. And then likewise for normal booster draft, not too many people requested it, and I'm generally not as much of a fan. Formats that are just about you attack with a 3/3 and then they play a 4/4 and you die. That's not really what drafts normally are, but they're a lot closer to that direction than sweet combos and lots of interesting decisions that you get in Cube and more powerful formats. So probably won't do a ton of booster draft, but again, if a lot of people want that, let me know. And I could certainly be convinced, especially if people are willing to pay for entry or something for the packs. That would be a strong incentive. So yeah, I guess also on that note, I'll say my Venmo is Benjamin-Hill-4 if anyone wants to donate. Still, there's no monetization here. I pay for editing and don't make money from this at all, so it's just a net payment unless people Venmo me. And a lot of people have, which I really, really appreciate. Thank you so much, everyone that's done that. No pressure. If you're short on cash, I totally understand. It's a global pandemic right now. But if you do have a couple extra bucks, I would really appreciate that. And it would just be good encouragement for me to keep on making videos and, keep on generating statistics to analyze and all sorts of commentary like that. So again, thank you for joining. Sorry for going on at the end for a little bit, but I had a lot of fun analyzing all these numbers and talking about it. And so hopefully you did too. And I'm not going to say hopefully you learned something because I don't think you should take too much from this 100-something leagues, but it's some things to think about, and play blue. See you next time.